Hey there, cats and kitties. I am the Blues Man, Johnny Blues, coming at you live to talk about Star Wars The Last Jedi once again. This time, most notably revolving around Supreme Leader Snoke. And this will be a spoilery discussion as per usual, even though the movie's been out for a few weeks, as of the time of this recording, a little bit longer. I still want to put it out there in case you haven't seen the film. But chances are, if you clicked on this video, you already have, and you have made up your mind about it, whether you love it or hate it, all that good stuff, which is still rife for debate, right down the middle of the fandom. But I really wanted to talk about Snoke from the point of view of going back to my sort of overview review discussion video about the film after having seen it. One of my gripes, one of my complaints was that he was dispatched so easily in the film by Kylo Ren, thus snuffing out any potential for learning more about him, where he came from, how he was so, well sort of established in the Force, how he was so powerful in the Force, how he rose to power as the figurehead of the First Order, and all this kind of stuff. And there is a counter argument that I have heard bandied about by a few people, basically saying, if you look at the original trilogy, let's call back to the original Star Wars trilogy, when it came to the Emperor, we really didn't know where he came from. We didn't know how he rose to power and all this kind of stuff. And we didn't need that to understand and enjoy the story and such like that. And so we should be applying that same kind of logic to this new modern trilogy. We really don't need to know. It's not important to the story and whatever like that. And it was my sort of, standpoint that, well, we could have gotten at least a little something, line of dialogue, some throwaway thing that was a reference. When it came to Luke and his whole story arc, he made references back to like Darth Sidious and such like that, calling back on the prequels. Very much investing that all of these Star Wars movies are coexisting. It's a one long tapestry of story, and it all interconnects and everything like that. And so that was a reference. That was something that it was a very small reference, and apparently it was so small that a lot of people can't wrap their minds around where Luke was, and that's one of their biggest gripes in the movie, and I spent a whole half-an-hour video talking about that, how in my estimation I loved the way Luke was portrayed in the film, but that was still a line of dialogue that I understood, having watched the prequels, where Luke was coming from, what information he had learned about the Jedi of old, and why he was so disenchanted with the Force and the Jedi and all that stuff, based on their own mess-ups back in the day, which is all, what we see occurring in the prequels. And I just thought, well, we could have gotten something. They could have given us a little bit, just enough to kind of get an impression on where Snoke came from, how he became so powerful, how he became the figurehead of the First Order. And we get none of that. And so, as I say, kind of wanting to answer to that counter argument about, well, we didn't know about the Emperor, we didn't know where he came from, and by and large, when they go to answer that, granted, love it or hate it, that's what the prequels are about. We find out all about that. But if we're just calling back to the original trilogy, when those first three films came out, we didn't know where the Emperor came from. Okay, fine, whatever. For my part, I feel like it's kind of a different thing. Because the original Star Wars trilogy were very much hearkening back to fairy tale tropes and archetypes. This was a sci-fi fantasy, grandiose in scope and everything like that. And it was very plain stated, who's the good guy, who's the bad guy. We found our heroes relatable because they were depicted relatably. They were human beings going through these different things that we all go through, wanting to seek something better for yourself, being sometimes cocksure and seemingly roguish, but really having a heart deep down in your center and actually caring about your friends, and rather than running from the fight and trying to just take care of your own ass, coming back and wanting to aid them. A young woman in the case of Leia whose responsibilities at such a young age, she wore this harsh facade because of those responsibilities and the fears she had, everything like that. And but she was still a strong, capable young woman, and so all these things, they were very endearing to us. And there are these sort of systematic story tropes that the Emperor embodied, the overbearing sort of, royalty that was enslaving his people, that had to be undone and everything like that. You can make sense of that from right off the bat. It's a very plain stated character role, characterization, character trope, archetype. And so you get that. With Snoke, you do get some estimation of what his, impetus is, what his driving force is, and that he wants to kill Luke. He wants to end the Jedi. But why? Where did he come from? And everything like that. The problem, where this problem arises, in my humble opinion, is the fact that this is a continuing story. This guy is what comes after the Emperor. Well, how? Where? How did he rise to that level? Is it simply for the fact that he is so powerful in the dark side of the Force? Say that. Imply that. Bang us over the head with it. Just give us a few little kernels. Something to let us know that that is what it is. I mean, you can make an inference. And I'm somebody who largely, that's what I did when I was interpreting what was going on with Luke's character in The Last Jedi. I made a lot of inferences based on things I knew, familiarity I had with what he had been doing, for those 30 years. And, I made sense of it. The problem with Snoke is he's a brand new character we were only just introduced to. And you want to know that there's some depth to this character. You don't just want to have him be a mask of evil who just wants to destroy all for whatever the hell reason, Especially Kylo, who is much more of a compelling character. He is our, pseudo-villain for this trilogy. A very depth-laden and gravitas-laden character with very intriguing qualities. And so, sort of the counter-argument being for some people, well, that's the point. That, putting the focus on him, that's what you really should put the focus on. But you have Snoke debuted in The Force Awakens as this giant hologram that practically smacks you upside the head with like a 2x4 of like, whoa, who is this big, monumentous, evil character? Where did he come from? How did he rise to power? How is he so powerful? How does he know as much as he does? Because it follows on from everything we got in the original trilogy. It's a continuation. There's a gap there. And that is inherently what a lot of people's issues were with Luke. There's a 30-year gap where they can't apparently apply themselves and think themselves out of all the 30 years that he experienced. They're just calling back to the last scene in Return of the Jedi, and that's Luke forevermore as far as they're concerned. So, but those are characters we're familiar with. You can make inferences based on what you know about them, based on what you know about their surroundings, what we're told in the film. We're actually told things about Luke that we can build upon and understand. We're told veritably nothing about Snoke. He just comes out of nowhere. He's just the all-powerful evil figure. And a lot of us just wanted a little bit more awareness of where he came from, how he fitted himself into the role that the Emperor, the void the Emperor had left behind. We didn't need to know all of the history of the Emperor because in the history of fairy tales, in fantasy, there are always lords lording over their people who have to be put in check. There are always princes fighting kings and stuff like that. With Snoke, he just came out of nowhere. He's a brand new character who just came out of nowhere. Now, granted, you might argue, well, what about Rey? We don't know much about where Rey came from. And there's a lot of divisiveness about that as well. Are her parents Obi-Wan Kenobi and someone? Are they, is she a Skywalker? Is she the product of deadbeat parents, as seems to be the answer? I'm content with that because it's something. With Snoke, we've got nothing. He's just the big bad leader. But he came on the coattails of another big bad leader who was more, the personification of those archetypes and tropes of old of the big bad evil. You know, you think of the villain in Robin Hood, whose name escapes me, but it's a typical fantasy story. You know who the hero is. You know who the bad guy is. That's all you really need to know. You don't need to go in depth with, Shreve Palpatine or whatever the hell his, name is. The whole growth of him, how he came to power, which is all in the prequels. You don't need it. And really, arguably, the prequels were more so kind of sort of about Obi-Wan and Anakin. But, there is Palpatine in the background all the while. All of that history being filled in, whether you love it or hate it or whatever. Take it or leave it. But again, with Snoke, it's slightly different because we didn't get much of anything. And he suddenly fills the void of somebody who we can make sense of. Now, again, playing devil's advocate, okay, well, he's penultimately powerful in the Force. So powerful, perhaps, this is maybe why he is in the role he is. That's maybe why he's fitted into the equivalent of what the Emperor was in the original trilogy, because he is so all-powerful. But it still stands to reason. It's still, there's still room enough for a couple of kernels, a couple of nuggets, just to gain some appreciation for where he came from. He didn't come out of nowhere. He has a history. He has a history in the Star Wars universe. What is his species? Where does he hail from? How did he learn about his powers and all this stuff? I mean, we don't need to necessarily know all of that to enjoy The Last Jedi. But overarchingly, it's a continuation. So there needs to be something to fill in that lack of information. A lot of people who were disenchanted and really disappointed with Luke, I feel personally, were feeling that resonating disappointment because they felt they didn't get the full story. They didn't gain the full picture of everything he had gone through. I had that. I had an estimation of what he had gone through for that 30 years we've not seen him since Return of the Jedi. So I was able to make sense of it. It was very empathetic, his story. To me, I completely was down with it. I understood it. I thought it was, in going into The Last Jedi, I thought it was kind of unrealistic to think, oh, Luke is going to come back and be this great warrior, this great Jedi who's going to, be swinging his lightsaber and all that stuff. I didn't hold that estimation of the character. I didn't think that's what we would get because of how much time had passed. How much older Mark Hamill, the character Luke Skywalker, would be. It just seemed unrealistic to me. And they played up the realism of his character, and they made enough, little nods to things here and there of what he went through, what he experienced, what he learned, the hardships he encountered, and all these things, the poor choices, whatever like that. And I was able to make the inferences and fill in the gaps in my own mind and understand. Snoke is just a different story. Snoke just came out of nowhere. He just, immediately took up the reins of that empty space where the Emperor once was, and how and why were not answered. And we didn't need a full movie to explain it. We don't need a full novel. I'm sure there will be a novel. I'm sure there will be an exploration of his character, of where he came from and all that kind of stuff. But I mean, they could have, with all the time, arguably, I feel, they wasted in the movie, things that could have been streamlined, like the Canto Bight thing. I get what that whole aspect of the movie was about, but it didn't need to be as long as it was to reach its conclusion. Character-wise, for Rose and for Finn and for the DJ character being the influence as he was, and, what happened with Phasma and everything like that. You could have reworked that whole scenario and fitted in just a few lines of dialogue of, even characters just like gossiping. Well, what's with Snoke? Where did he come from? Well, this is a story I heard. And it would have been enough flavor just peppered in so that we wouldn't have to feel so compelled to react to getting nothing. Because there was a Vader before, because there was an Emperor before, who fitted the villainous archetypes that made sense. We didn't need the extra information as to where they came from and why and how. Arguably, the prequels were unnecessary to that degree, and you can take them or leave them. But because, of course, they delve into all of that, for better or worse. I'm not saying we need a prequel trilogy just based on Snoke. All I'm saying is a couple lines of dialogue, whether it was from Snoke himself, talking to Kylo, talking to Hux, talking to Rey, whatever it is, just a little bit of a glimpse as to where he might have come from. Ah, my child, I haven't seen someone as well versed in the Force in such a long time, since my own humble origins. Something like that. Just something small. And so I do take minor issue with that counter argument that if we look back to the original trilogy, we didn't know anything about the Emperor. Well, that's because we didn't need to, because he fitted an archetype. Snoke arguably does, but he is the replacement. So where did he come from? Is basically what I'm getting down to. And so yeah, I just wanted to impart that, my particular take on that counter argument that we didn't need to know about Snoke. I feel like we did need to know a little more about him. And I would have been much more satisfied had we learned a little more about him, quite frankly. And so yeah, that's going to be pretty much it for me on this. Hope this video finds you well. May the Force be with you, and I'll catch you all later. Peace.